The furnace clicked on at 11:14 p.m. I know because I was watching the clock on the microwave, standing in my own kitchen in my coat and scarf, still holding my overnight bag. I'd taken the early train back from Ottawa. The conference ran short, my presentation went well, and my husband had no idea I was coming home a day early. The lights upstairs were on. His car was in the driveway. That part was normal, but there was another car parked along the curb in front of our house, a gray Audi I'd seen before, many times, in the parking lot of my best friend's condo building. I stood there for a long moment. The furnace kept running. The kitchen smelled like the candles my husband liked, cedar and bergamot, and I thought, stupidly, that it was strange she'd lit candles on a Tuesday. I set my bag down on the floor without making a sound. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because I think people assume it's immediate, the rage, the certainty. It wasn't. It was more like the feeling of stepping off a curb you didn't see. That half second before your body understands what's happening. I walked to the bottom of the stairs and I listened, and what I heard confirmed everything I didn't want to know. I didn't go up. I know that surprises people. A lot of women, when I've told this story, say they would have thrown that door open. Maybe they would have, but I had spent 11 years married to a man who was very good at making me feel like the unreasonable one, and I knew in my bones that if I walked up those stairs, I would be the one who ended up crying and apologizing. He had a way of doing that, turning things around so fast your head spun. So instead, I took out my phone and I started recording. I stood at the bottom of the stairs. The audio was clear enough. I had 4 minutes and 32 seconds of it before I walked back to the kitchen, picked up my bag, and drove to my mother's house in Kanata. I didn't sleep. I sat at her kitchen table and I drank chamomile tea I didn't want, and I stared at the wall, and at some point around 3 in the morning, I thought, this is the night my life split in two. My husband's name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that we had been together since I was 24. We met at a work event in downtown Toronto. He was charming and funny, and he made me feel, for the first time in my adult life, like someone was genuinely paying attention to me. We moved to Ottawa together when his firm transferred him. We bought the house in Barrhaven with the finished basement and the backyard that backed onto a park. We had talked about children, loosely, the way you do when you both assume there's time. My best friend had been my best friend since university. We'd done everything together. She was in my wedding. I was supposed to be in hers, except she'd called off her engagement 2 years ago. She'd told me it just wasn't right, that she needed time to figure out what she wanted. I thought about that a lot, sitting at my mother's table at 3 in the morning. I did not tell my mother what had happened. Not that night. I told her I'd come home early and wasn't feeling well and needed to sleep. She made up the guest room without asking questions, because she's the kind of woman who understands that sometimes the questions can wait. I called in to work the next morning and said I had a migraine. Then I sat in the guest room with my laptop and I started doing what I should have started doing years ago. I looked at our joint accounts. I looked at the credit card statements I'd always trusted him to manage. I looked at the e-transfer records. There were charges at a hotel in Gatineau, twice in October, once in September, once in August. Restaurant bills for 2 one-nights he'd told me he was working late. Small things, individually. Together they told a story so obvious I felt humiliated that I hadn't seen it sooner. I took screenshots of everything. Then I called a lawyer. Not a family friend, not someone he knew. I found a woman in Centretown who came highly recommended on a forum for people navigating divorce in Ontario. I made an appointment for the following week, and I said nothing to anyone. When I went home that evening, he was in the kitchen making pasta. He kissed me on the cheek and asked how Ottawa was. I said it was fine. I set the table. We ate dinner. He talked about a deal his firm was closing, and I nodded and refilled his water glass and thought about e-transfer records and hotel receipts in Gatineau. I don't know how I did it. I think I had gone somewhere very quiet inside myself. Some room I didn't know I had. This went on for 3 weeks. I need you to understand the particular cruelty of that period, pretending everything was normal while simultaneously dismantling the life we built, one document at a time. My lawyer was thorough. She walked me through the Divorce Act, through what our matrimonial home meant under Ontario family law, through what I was entitled to given that I'd left my own career trajectory to follow him to Ottawa. She was calm and precise, and she made me feel, for the first time since that Tuesday night in my kitchen, like I had some ground under my feet. My best friend texted me 3 times during those 3 weeks. "How are you? Miss you? Coffee soon?" I didn't respond. I also discovered during those 3 weeks that I was pregnant. I found out on a Saturday morning in the downstairs bathroom, alone, while my husband slept in upstairs. I sat on the cold tile floor for a long time. 11 weeks, the doctor's office confirmed when I called. I had been so consumed with work and with the ordinary busyness of our life that I hadn't registered what I'd been ignoring in my own body. I want to be careful about how I describe what came next, because I know it's the part that divides people. All I can tell you is that I sat in that doctor's office and I thought about what it would mean to have a child with a man I was actively building a legal case against. I thought about what it would mean for that child to grow up in the middle of what was coming. I thought about shared custody, about lawyers and court dates, about being tied to someone for 18 years who had spent what appeared to be at least the last 8 months lying to me with extraordinary ease. I made a decision. It was mine to make. I scheduled the appointment for a clinic in the east end of the city. It was a Thursday morning in February, one of those Ottawa winter days where the cold has a particular quality. Not just cold, but absolute. Like the air itself has decided to stop trying. I drove myself, I had told no one. The clinic was quiet. There were 2 other women in the waiting room, both alone, both looking at their phones. I filled out my intake forms, and a nurse brought me to a consultation room and said the doctor would be with me shortly. When the door opened, I looked up. I had to look twice. I know her. I have known her for years as my husband's younger sister. She lives in Ottawa, which is why we'd ended up at the same clinic. Some hideous coincidence of geography. She's a doctor. I knew she was a doctor. I just had never known, or perhaps never retained, what kind. She stopped completely when she saw me. Neither of us spoke for what felt like a very long time. She was the one who found her voice first. She said my name very quietly, like she was confirming I was real. I said yes. I said, "It's me." She sat down. Not in the doctor's chair, in the chair next to mine, the one that's meant for a support person. She set her clipboard on her knee, and she looked at me and she said, "Does my brother know you're here?" I said no. She nodded slowly. She asked me very gently if I was sure about my decision. Not in a challenging way. She was careful about that. I could tell she was trying to be careful. But in the way a person asks when they want to make sure you've had room to think. I told her I was sure. I told her how far along I was. And then, because she was sitting in the wrong chair and looking at me with an expression I couldn't fully read, I told her everything. I don't know why. Maybe because she was the first person in 3 weeks I'd had a real conversation with. Maybe because she was his sister and some part of me needed someone in his family to know what he'd done. I told her about the car in the driveway, about the recording, about the hotel receipts in Gatineau and the e-transfer records and the 3 weeks of dinners where I'd refilled his water glass and said nothing. I told her about the lawyer in Centretown. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, the room was very quiet. Outside the window, I could see the parking lot, snow banked along the edges, a woman in a red coat walking toward a minivan. She said, "I'm sorry." She said it like she meant it, not like a reflex. Then she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand that I'm telling you this because it's the right thing to do, not because he's my brother." She said she had seen things over the past several months. Things at family dinners, comments, absences, that had made her uncomfortable, that she had chosen to ignore because she didn't want to believe what they might mean. She said she thought she owed me that honesty. She said, "I'll still be your doctor today if you want me to be." I said I did. What she did not tell me until much later was that she had made a decision of her own in that room. She had heard enough, and she had seen enough, and she was done being the person who looked the other way, because looking the other way was easier. My husband, as it turned out, had not been careful. Beyond the affair, beyond the hotel bills and the restaurant receipts, he had done something that crossed from personal failure into actual wrongdoing. His firm handled a property portfolio, and over the course of about 18 months, he had been quietly redirecting referral commissions, not enormous amounts individually, but significant in total, through a numbered company his girlfriend had set up. My lawyer had flagged it as potentially worth investigating, but I hadn't had documentation. His sister had documentation. She had stumbled onto it months earlier through a family matter involving a shared investment account. She hadn't understood fully what she was seeing, but after our conversation in that clinic room, she went home and she looked at it again, and then she called a forensic accountant she knew through her hospital's billing department, and then she called my lawyer. I found out about all of this when my lawyer phoned me on a Friday afternoon in March and told me to sit down. The legal process, once it started, moved faster than I expected. The Ontario Securities Commission was involved by April. His firm began an internal investigation. He was suspended without pay in May, pending the outcome. We were in mediation by June. My lawyer sat across from his lawyer at a table in a boardroom on Elgin Street, and she was, I have to say, magnificent. We settled on terms that reflected both the matrimonial property and the harm done by the financial misconduct. The house in Barrhaven sold in July. It went in 4 days, which is the Ottawa market for you, and I took my share and put a down payment on a condo in Westboro, walking distance from the river, with a balcony that gets morning light. His sister and I don't talk often, but we have talked. The first time was a phone call in August, after everything was finalized, and she said she hoped I understood why she had done what she did. I told her I did. I told her I was grateful. She said, "He's my brother and I love him, but what he did was wrong. Multiple kinds of wrong." I couldn't sit with it anymore. I think about that a lot. The particular courage of that, to refuse to protect someone you love from consequences they earned, to choose integrity over loyalty when those two things pull in opposite directions. I don't think most people are built for that. I'm not sure I am, but she was, and it changed everything. My best friend has tried to reach me many times since this all came out. I have nothing to say to her, not out of bitterness, or not only out of bitterness, but because I genuinely don't know what there is to say. The friendship we had no longer exists. Maybe it never existed in the form I thought it did. That grief is separate from the grief about my marriage, and in some ways it's harder, because with him I can point to the betrayal and name it clearly. With her, I keep turning it over, trying to understand how someone who knew me that well decided I was worth so little. I don't have an answer to that. I've stopped expecting one. It's December now. The first real snow came last week, and I watched it from my balcony with a coffee in both hands, and I thought about the woman who stood in her kitchen 14 months ago in her coat and scarf, still holding her overnight bag, listening to the furnace click on. She feels far away, not gone. I am still her. But the distance between then and now is not just time. It's the difference between a life that was happening to me and a life I am actually living. I sold the cedar and bergamot candles at a garage sale in September. Someone paid $2 for them. It felt like exactly the right price. There's a moment in this story I keep returning to. Not the night with the furnace, not the hotel receipts, not even the clinic room. It's the garage sale in September. $2 for a candle. That detail still makes me laugh a little, in the way you laugh at things that used to hurt. I've thought a lot about why everything unfolded the way it did. Not in a mystical sense. I don't believe the universe was arranging things on my behalf. But I do believe that the choices people make accumulate. They add up quietly, over months and years, until one day the total is impossible to ignore. My husband made choices. My best friend made choices. And for a long time, I made the choice to look away from things that made me uncomfortable. Because looking away felt easier than asking hard questions. That's not self blame, it's just honesty. Honesty is where I've had to start. What his sister did took something I don't think gets named often enough. It wasn't just courage. Courage implies you weren't afraid. She was afraid. She told me so later. She was afraid of what it would cost her, afraid of the family dinners that would never be the same, afraid of becoming the person who broke something that couldn't be fixed. She did it anyway. Not because it was easy or painless, but because she had looked at what she knew and decided she couldn't live quietly inside that knowledge anymore. That's a different thing than courage. That's integrity. The kind that holds even when no one's watching, even when the cost is personal and real. I had to find my own version of that, not in one dramatic moment, but in dozens of small ones. The decision to call a lawyer instead of confronting him in the kitchen. The decision to document rather than react. The decision to sit with what I discovered about my own finances and actually understand it line by line instead of handing it off and hoping someone else would figure it out. I was not by nature a person who read legal documents carefully. I became one. Not because I'm exceptional, but because I had no other option, and because the alternative, being passive while my life was decided around me, was no longer something I was willing to accept. The pregnancy was the hardest part to talk about, and I'll say only this. I made a decision that was right for my life, in my circumstances at that time. I don't ask anyone to agree with it. What I do believe is that a decision made clearly, from a place of genuine self-knowledge, is almost always better than one made from fear or pressure or someone else's idea of what you're supposed to do. Clarity is something you have to earn. It doesn't arrive on its own. I live in Westboro now, morning light on the balcony, coffee in both hands. I'm 32 years old and I am, for the first time in a long time, building something that actually belongs to me. Not because the hard part is over, it isn't, not entirely. But because I know now that I can sit inside difficulty without dissolving. That's not a small thing to know about yourself. The cedar and bergamot candles sold for $2. Exactly right.